Good evening and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. I'm Maggie Williams, Director of the Institute of Politics here at Harvard, and it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's guest, Jorge Ramos. Mr. Ramos is a gifted journalist, author, and television anchor whose work, passion, and thought leadership influences not only America and its politics, but countries and politics well beyond our borders. As co-host of Univision's evening news broadcast, Jorge Ramos reaches 2 million viewers every night, and another million viewers with El Punta, his Sunday political show. His television program broadcast in the U.S. It's broadcast in the U.S. and in 13 Latin American countries. He also writes a weekly column for more than 40 newspapers in the United States and Latin America, which is distributed by the New York Times Syndicate. He has interviewed a host of world leaders and influential people, including President Obama, John McCain, George Bush, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Romney, Gingrich, Fidel Castro, Calderon, and the list goes on. He has been recognized for excellence in journalism, receiving many awards, including the Cabot Award from Columbia University, as well as 8 Emmy Awards. He was honored with the Ruben Salazar Award by the National Council of La Raza. This award is presented to an individual who has dedicated his life to promoting the accurate and positive portrayal of Latino historical, political, economic, and cultural contributions to American society. A Pew Foundation survey found that Mr. Ramos is the second most recognized Latino leader after Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor. Himself an immigrant and naturalized U.S. citizen, Mr. Ramos is a passionate and knowing voice for immigration reform. Newsweek, in its review of his book, A Country for All, an immigrant manifesto, said, "It's not called a manifesto for nothing." In 6 chapters, Mr. Ramos humanizes undocumented immigrants, argues why you should care, and explains why reform is needed now. Above all, it is an inspiring book that is passionate to a fault and is soundly reasoned, a lot like our guest tonight. At long last, we welcome Jorge Ramos to the forum.
Thank you so much. Thanks. So it's true, it's been years, yeah? Well, thanks so much for coming. It's really my honor to be here. As I was talking to a group just a few minutes ago, you think that Harvard is normal, but this is not normal. You are among the most, not only intelligent, hopefully, but some of the most influential and powerful people on earth. And whatever you say will have an impact in the future. And that's why we come here to talk to you, just to see if we can sort of give you glimpses of what we think. This I can't change. I'm an immigrant, I'm a Latino, and I'm a journalist. That's what I know for sure. That's the only thing I know for sure. And that's what I'm going to be talking for a few more minutes. And then I remember that I chose to talk about the future tonight, and I think I made a mistake because every time, first, 2050 is way too far. It is unrealistic to try to predict the future. And this is what I've known for a long, long time, that as a journalist, if you try to predict the future, you'll fail, you'll make a mistake. So having said that, let's predict the future. Let me just start with a question, and let me put myself right over here. And look at me. Am I a dinosaur? I know that you don't know me well, and you don't want to hurt my feelings, but the answer is yes. I worked as an anchorman for 28 years. I started being an anchorman when I was 28 years old. I worked for the same company for 3 decades, and millions of people have to make an appointment with me every night at 6:30 until 7 o'clock to watch what I have to say about the world. But if you turn in at 6:25 or 7:05, you won't be able to see what I have to say. In other words, that's the definition of a dinosaur. And that's precisely what I've been doing for the last 28 years. And what I want to tell you is that the world and the news business is changing so fast that we have to do something about it as a journalist. And I have to morph into something different, into a different news animal other than the dinosaur. So my role as the anchorman and my role in the newscast that I've been doing for so many years is changing so fast that if we don't change, again, we'll disappear. In other words, I'm in the process of extinction. And I really don't know what's going to happen in 2050 with the news business. But there are a few changes that I want to point out. And the first one is this one. The first problem is that for us in the news business is that people right now are not watching television. There's a huge migration of eyes from the television sets to your cell phones, to iPads, to computers, to laptops. And do you remember when the newspaper people used to say that they didn't know if the internet was going to change their business? That sounds so naive right now, but that's precisely where we are in the television business. There is a lot of denial among some of my colleagues. But let me tell you something. Every single night I do a newscast in Spanish. But also at the same time, I'm doing a weekly show in English in a new network called Fusion, which is a partnership between ABC News and Univision. And every week I have to assume that some people watching me do not even own a television. And I'm sure many of you do not even own a television. So in other words, I'm producing a show, I'm producing a new segment that will be watched not on television, but on cell phones, iPads, laptops, and computers. It is like taking a flight to Paris and landing in Hong Kong. That's precisely what we're doing. So this means that there is a lot of confusion in my business, because every time I'm producing a package, or every time I'm doing a story or doing an interview, I have to think that increasingly, instead of people watching me on television, they're going to be watching me on social media or on cell phones, on computers. And that changes completely the approach that I have. That's one problem. The other problem is that it's money. We know how to make money on television through advertising. However, we don't know yet exactly how to make money selling news on iPhones, iPads, and laptops. And as a journalist, you have to survive. So that's the first problem, the migration, the huge migration of eyes from television to cell phones. The second big problem is that as a journalist, I cannot compete with Twitter, with Facebook, and with Instagram. I just can't. I give up. If there's an earthquake right now in China, or a shooting in California, or an accident in France, I cannot compete with one person who didn't study journalism, who has a cell phone, and who's closer to the place where the news happen. I can't compete. And when Eric Garner was killed by the New York police last July, actually after being choked by the police, there was one 22-year-old called Ramsey Orta. And thanks to Ramsey Orta, we know exactly what happened. We know that Eric Garner was killed. We know that thanks to him. And I had the opportunity to talk to filmmaker Spike Lee, who made an incredible documentary called I Can't Breathe, based on the video that Orta took. I can't compete with Orta. I wasn't there. When Walter Scott was killed by a white police officer in South Carolina just a few days ago, there was a Dominican immigrant called Faidin Santana. We have no idea who Faidin Santana is, but Faidin Santana is a barber. He was passing by. He saw that Walter Scott was being killed, and he decided to take a video. Thanks to that video, we know what's going on right now with in South Carolina and in many other police departments around the country. And, and let me give you another example, and this is beautiful. One of the best friends of Mexican President, Enrique Peña Nieto, and a government official, look what he did. He wanted to take a vacation. So, so he took a government helicopter to pick up his family to go on vacation. And he thought everything was going to be fine, except that his neighbor saw that and decided to post the pictures online. Of course, after a few days, this government official had to quit. But thanks to Horta, thanks to Feliz Santana, and thanks to this beautiful neighbor, then justice was being served, and journalism is better. So instead of rejecting, as a journalist, I have two options. Either I reject the fact that I can't compete with Instagram, with Facebook, or with Twitter, or I just embrace it. And my position is that we have to embrace that. I think journalism and justice are better off, much better off, nowadays, if we have witnesses all around the world helping us as journalists. Now, in light of these dramatic, huge changes in my profession, you could argue that in 2050 that technology and social media would change so much that, that they would create 1 billion journalists around the world, and that the work of the traditional journalists would disappear in 2050. But I can't agree with that. First of all, because I would lose my job, and I would have no job. And second, because I think that journalists nowadays and in 2050 would be more needed than ever before because of 5 reasons. First, it has to do with credibility. Many times when I'm seeing social media, when I'm checking the internet, when I'm using my computer, I realize that what I'm seeing is false. It doesn't have a quote. It's not put in perspective. So that's the most important thing. The most important thing that we have as journalists is credibility. So the first reason why journalists are needed more than ever before is simply because of credibility. Second, because of independence. I don't want to get my news from a political party or from a public relations company or from a lobbyist. I want to know who's giving me that information, and journalists are great for doing that. Third is relevance. Do I really care about what I'm getting? I mean, is it affecting my life? Is it affecting your life? Is it affecting the life of my neighbors, of my country? The fourth and most important reason why journalists are doing a different job is to put things in perspective. If we don't, as journalists, put in perspective what it means that Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz are running for office, if we don't say that there was a guy called Ben Fernandez in 1980 who did it before them, and another guy called Bill Richardson, whose mom is from Mexico, that's regardless of the Richardson last name, then it is really difficult to understand what's changing in this country. And the fifth and most important reason why I think journalists are important and more important than ever is that we have the possibility, forget the possibility, we have the duty, the obligation to challenge those who are in power. And that's something that in other professions, in the social media, you simply cannot do. I think the most important social responsibility of journalists is to prevent the abuse of those who are in power. And if we do that, I think it'll be fine. This is what I'm expecting from journalists and what I'm expecting from everyone with whom I'm working. I expect everyone, every journalist, to challenge and question every person they talk to. Let me tell you a little bit about Fidel Castro. Once I met Fidel Castro in Guadalajara in one of these summits. And it was my only chance to question him, and probably he's going to die soon. But I knew that was my only possibility to talk to him. He was in a hotel room. I saw, like in a cabana in Guadalajara, I had the possibility to talk to him. And of course, it would have been easier to say, Mr. Castro, how are you feeling? Do you like Mexico? And do you like the weather? And so on. It would be better, more cordial, more Mexican-like. But I decided to ask him about the lack of democracy in Cuba, the fact that he was a dictator, the fact that there were no elections, and of course, a few seconds later, the bodyguards pushed me to the side and the interview was over 1 minute and 3 seconds later. However, as a journalist, that was my responsibility. But on the other hand, and also talking about Fidel Castro, if you have to challenge those who are in power, but at the same time, you got to be credible. As you know, I live in Miami, and every year we kill Fidel Castro 3 or 4 times. It happens. It's cyclical. You know, oh, he's dead, and then you go back to the newsroom and then start checking your sources and call people in Cuba, and he's alive. No, it happens every year. So in one of those occasions, I was a little tired of waiting, and Fidel Castro was alive and alive. So I went to the supermarket, and I was behind a Cuban-American couple. And they said, and she told him, oh, you know, Fidel is dead. And then this guy turned to her and said, you know, until Univision and Jorge Ramos say that, I won't believe it. That's the kind of trust that I have to earn every single day as a journalist. And if I don't have that trust, then my job as a journalist is not worth it. So those are the 2 most important things that we can do as journalists, regardless or despite the fact that the internet is here, that social media, that Twitter, that Facebook are here. We can challenge, and we should challenge those who are in power, and we got to be credible, because if you're not credible, then everything is gone. So that's the first part of my conversation with you. The other part of the conversation has to do with the future of Latinos, and that's a little easier. 31 years ago, Cesar Chavez, the iconic leader of the Hispanic community, said, I've seen the future, and the future is ours. Well, that future is precisely right now. And for the first time in history, we're seeing the Latino community going from big numbers to power. And it's beautiful to have that little power for the first time. It feels great. And let me give you some examples in which I'm sensing that things are changing in this country. Right now, there are about 55 million Latinos in this country, maybe about 60 million if we consider all the undocumented immigrants. And many of them are obviously here. And in the year 2050, there's going to be about 100 million Latinos in this country. 1 in every 3 Americans will be Hispanic. So we're a lot of people here, and that has a huge impact. So we are in the middle of a huge, incredible demographic revolution that is changing everything. The music that we hear, the rhythms that we hear, the baseball players that we watch on TV or on their cell phones, the music, I said it, the food that we eat. I've said this many times in the past, but it's very symbolic. More tortillas are being sold than hamburger buns in this country, and more salsa than ketchup. And that says a lot. And also politics is being affected. For the first time, no one, absolutely no one, can make it to the White House without the Hispanic vote. George W. Bush spoke a few words in Spanish, and he got 44% of the Hispanic vote in the year 2004, and of course he got reelected. Barack Obama got 67% in 2008, 71% almost 2012, and he won. So obviously, all the political candidates, I'm sure they would love to come here and try to get your vote, but if they're Republicans, they got to think about a number, 33%. If Republicans can get 33% of the Hispanic vote, they won't win. That's the threshold for them, 33%. John McCain got very upset because he got 31% of the Hispanic vote. He was for immigration reform, and he lost because he didn't get 33%. Mitt Romney, 27% of the Hispanic vote. And just a word of advice, if you want the Hispanic vote, don't propose self-deportation, because because this is what we listen. When you say self-deportation, what I listen is, give me your vote, but get out of here. And if the Republicans candidate continue saying that, they're going to lose the next election. So remember, Republicans need 33% of the Hispanic vote, and that's why it's so important for them to talk to you and to talk to us. And that's completely new. In other words, they have to talk to me and to Univision and to Fusion and to you in order to get to the White House. And that's new. That's a newfound power that we didn't have before. To be Latino nowadays is cool, I guess. If you have it is. It wasn't, but it is now. It wasn't in the past. A few decades ago, in some parks and stores, you would see signs, no dogs and Mexicans allowed. It's true. It's a true story in California, in Arizona. No dogs and Mexican allowed. And now, the New York Times reported last week that Jeff Bush, in a 2009 voter registration application, he labeled himself as Hispanic. So if Jeff Bush wants to become Latino, I think, and this is a funny story, how do you translate George Bush into Spanish? It's Jorge Ramos. It is. So, and it is true. So if Bush wants to run as a Latino, they can borrow my last name, and that will be fine. It's true. The translation is Jorge Ramos. So I certainly hope that the first Hispanic president has been born already. For the first time in history, 2 Hispanic candidates are running for the White House. We have Senator Ted Cruz from Florida. He just announced yesterday. And as a matter of fact, they just called me now. I'm going to be talking to him tomorrow. So you have questions for him, let me know because I'm going to need them. The other one is Ted Cruz. What's ironic about Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio is that they are Republicans. The majority of Latinos historically, they tend to vote 2-1 for Democrats. So it is interesting that regardless of the criticism of the Republican Party, the Republicans have been doing something right. The fact is that they have 2 candidates, and Democrats, they don't have a single Hispanic candidate for this election. The other interesting thing is that they're Cuban Americans. The majority of Latinos in this country are Mexican Americans or Mexican origin. So it's going to be interesting to see if Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, Marco speaks Spanish fluently, Ted Cruz is not the case, if they're going to be able to get the Hispanic vote simply because they're Latinos. This is an important question. Should we vote for Latinos just because they are Latinos? And we have a great case, a great example with Marco Rubio and with Ted Cruz. Now, on the other hand, I hope that with more Latinos in power, with more Latinos in Congress, we can solve the situation of 11 million undocumented immigrants in this country. With more Latinos in Congress, this would be a non-issue, but it is an issue right now because we only have 3 Hispanic senators, and it is impossible when you don't have political representation. It is very difficult to do that. So I hope that this country can treat those immigrants who came after me with the same generosity and respect that I got. And because this is my idea of the American dream, that an immigrant like me can have a daughter studying in Harvard. I'm really proud of you, Paul. That's my American dream. Just imagine that. I got here when I was 24. I had no money. I had to work. Just like many of you, I had the opportunity to talk to you just a few minutes ago, and that's precisely the dream. Just imagine your parents, how proud they are that you are here. So this is the new normal, that Latinos finally are being accepted in Harvard. They have the possibility to be president of the United States or presidenta, and who knows, maybe the next or the first Hispanic president will come from this group. So just to conclude, I think 2050 will be a great year for a Hispanic journalist like me, because in 2050, I'll be 92, and if I make it, it'll be simply great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Maggie.
Okay. questions start in just a moment. I think most of you know the drill, but let me repeat it for you. Please identify yourself and your affiliation. One brief question, please. No speeches. End your question with a question mark. And I say, we have you. Okay, everyone knows where there's a mic there and mic there. Why don't we start right here with a question?
Hi, Mr.
Hello.
Ramos. Thank you so much.
Fine.
Hi. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Valentina Perez, and I'm a senior at the college. So obviously, the Latino community is extremely heterogeneous. So my question for you is, looking to the future and considering this diversity, how salient do you think that differences among Latinos, such as country of origin, will be in the future, if at all?
We're very different, and people make a mistake if they think that the Hispanic community is monolithic. See, the big difference that we're seeing right now in the campaign, we're still 19 months away from the election. I mean, who's going to be able to stand that? But we have Marco Rubio, whose parents are Cuban refugees, Ted Cruz, who was born in Canada, and he was born in Canada, and whose dad, Rafael Cruz, was born in Cuba. But Cuban Americans are a minority, maybe no more than 3 or 4% of the Hispanic population. And 2 Cuban Americans are running for the White House. The majority of Latinos are Mexican Americans, and the concerns for immigrants of Mexican origin are probably mostly immigration and the economy. But if you talk to Puerto Ricans here in Boston or in New York, they're concerned about poverty and education, about how to pay the huge debt in Puerto Rico. Dominicans have completely different concerns. And Cubans and Cuban Americans in Miami are debating endlessly about what's going to happen in Cuba right now that Barack Obama has decided to do something so American that it is that if something doesn't work for 55 years, you got to try something different. So we are not monolithic, and by the way, that's where the country is going. This country is becoming much more diverse, and I think it's becoming a stronger country and more tolerant, because eventually, whites won't be the majority in this country. And when you live in a country where there is no majority, democracy has to work. So this wonderful American experiment would be on how to manage diversity and how to, and at the end, how to make sure that the promise of the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal, will have a real value. Because right now, what we see is that not all men and women are created equal in this country.
Okay. We'll take right here.
Hi, Jorge, if I may call you that. Thank you so much for speaking as well. My name is Alex Jurgen. I'm a student in the joint program between Harvard Kennedy School and Harvard Business School, and was until recently the president of the Harvard Business School Republicans. My question is, sort of following on that question, the immigration issue aside, what are the issues where Republicans could appeal to Latinos, again, fully cognizant of the fact that it's extremely large and very diverse community?
Ronald Reagan used to say that Latinos are Republicans, they just don't know it. And for some reason, when George W. Bush got reelected in 2004 and got 44% of the Hispanic population, there was a shift. And Republicans back then, 10 years ago, they thought that they were going to be able to capture at least half of the Hispanic vote. The fact is that when it comes to values, our community is still very traditional. When it comes to gay marriage, when it comes to abortion, when it comes to religious freedoms, when it comes to the importance of family, that the family is more important than work. Those values are something that Republicans could have used in order to get the Hispanic vote. But then you can do whatever you want. You can propose the best economic plan. You can do the best education plan. But if at the same time you are saying, get out of this country, we're not going to listen. So I know that the premise of your question was putting immigration aside. We can't put immigration aside. You see poll after poll saying that that the most important issue for Latinos is not immigration. It's true. It is the economy and it's jobs, healthcare, education. That's absolutely true. But immigration is so close to our heart. We know so many immigrants, and many of us are immigrants, that it is impossible to put that aside. So as an advice to Republicans, it's great that we share your values. It's great that you have different economic and educational programs. However, unless you resolve the immigration issue, and it's very easy to do that, next Monday, go to the House of Representatives, take a vote on the Senate plan, pass immigration reform, and believe me, the number of Hispanics voting for Republicans will go up.
Thank you. Yes, right here.
Hi, Juan Hernandez. I'm an MPP student. I'm also the editor-in-chief of the Harvard Journal of Hispanic Policy. My question is to your point about big numbers translating to big power. And I don't think we've seen that yet nationally. Certainly in certain states and urban geographies like my home state of California. But how can we translate our big numbers to big national power when we are still concentrated in certain strongholds like the Southwest? We're emerging in other states like Alabama, but we've been seeing really restrictive policies passed in those areas.
I think I said from big numbers to power, not big power, not yet. It's little power. And it feels good to have power, but the power that we have is still very limited. Remember, we only have 3 senators. With 17% of the population, I really think that we're about 20% of the population. In other words, we should have 20 senators, but we only have 3 senators. We should have about 66, 67 members of Congress. We only have about 22. 2 governors. So that's incremental. And remember, we were talking just a few minutes ago. I think that power comes from events like this, comes from Shakira, comes from, comes from Ricky Martin, comes from Bruno Mars, who has a strange relationship with a Hispanic family at some point. So So that's where we get our power. We get our power from, what's the percentage of Latinos in Harvard? Who knows? They told me 6%, 12%. Well, we still need more, at least 17, or it's not a matter of quotas, but it's a matter of being present. So that's where we get our power. We get our power from tomorrow when I talk to Marco Rubio, that I ask him a question that will make news nationwide. That's where I get my power. You get your power from publishing something, from saying something interesting right now, from publishing something online tonight. That's where we get our power. I think that writers and singers, they like to say that there's a moment in their lives when they finally recognize their own voice. And that's where we are right now, recognizing our own voice. And then we scream, we say power, we say we want the White House, and then we get surprised at the beginning. That's the stage where we are right now. But it is with little examples along the way that make the changes. It's impossible. African Americans already have their first African American president, but there are more Latinos than African Americans. Therefore, you can argue, it is our turn. Of course, it'll be a huge difference if we get a Hispanic president. I think we have to get power. First, you have to imagine that power. And I think Hollywood, and in this case Netflix, is a few steps ahead of Washington. So if in House of Cards, I'm sure you've watched it, Hector Mendoza was about to get to the presidency, although he couldn't deal with the terrible Francis Underwood. If Netflix can imagine the first Hispanic president, I'm sure we can. Yeah.
Right here.
Mm.
Hi, my name is Nasser Mufti. I'm at Harvard Business School, second year. I'm actually from Miami as well.
Okay.
So you spoke, what you said earlier actually struck a chord with, I'm sure, many of us here, when you said that you want us to go out into the world, and because we have power, and eventually our generation, and specifically this group of Harvard students, can go out into their communities and eventually claim that power. How exactly are the concrete ways that we, in your opinion, can go out to our communities after we leave this place and claim that flower?
It's completely up to you. I was the other day I was talking with David Axelrod, who obviously was part of the Obama campaign, and he told me something really interesting. He said, whenever young people think that there's a problem, they think that if they create an app, it's gonna be solved. And then his conclusion was, and that is not true. So yes, you can create an app. You can start a new business. But there are many different ways in which you can empower yourself and have a voice. My only recommendation is the same recommendation that you hear everywhere else. In other words, do what you are passionate about, because otherwise you're going to be miserable. I'm agnostic, so after we die, I have no idea what's going to happen. But I'm sure hell would be to spend every day, every hour of my life doing things that I don't like. So you just got to do in whatever you like the most. My dad was an architect, and he was not a very good architect. He wasn't. He didn't build a lot of things. But he was a great magician. But here's the problem. He didn't have the courage to confront his dad and say, you know, Dad, I don't want to be an architect. I'd rather be a magician. He would have been the best magician in the world. But he didn't have the courage to do that. I think I learned from that, because when I was growing up, he told me, you just got to be a doctor, an attorney, an architect, or an engineer. He said, oh, of course not. I mean, I feel no passion for those professions. And then I told him, well, I think I'm going to be a journalist. And I remember that he told me, what are you going to do with that? ¿Qué vas a hacer con eso? And I think I learned from him that I shouldn't follow his lead, that I should do what I really feel passionate about. So that's your decision to make, but I think as a community, we need many voices. There's a constant debate within the Hispanic community that why don't we have another Cesar Chavez? We don't need another Cesar Chavez. We need 1,000 Cesar Chavez. And that's precisely where we are right now. So you might be the next one, no?
Thank you.
So we're going to go right over here.
Hello, my name is Janine Alfonso, and I'm a senior here at Harvard. And well, I grew up listening to you. I'm from Hialeah, Florida, an immigrant from Cuba. And so, I mean, when I tell my parents that I saw you, they're going to flip out. But I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how you kind of maybe transitioned from just like a local news anchor that was well known within the Hispanic community, someone who was known nationally, and if you have any advice to people who are Latinos who are thinking about entering kind of like the political realm right now, and what you think we should be doing, what are the strategies that we should be kind of taking in order to make our own voices heard?
I grew up in the old-fashioned way. Remember, I'm a dinosaur. So the way it used to be in my profession is that you went to college and got a degree, and then got a really small job in a small market. You become a writer, a producer, and then eventually you become a correspondent in a small community, and then go to a middle market, and then to a huge market in Los Angeles, New York, and who knows. That doesn't work anymore. I'm doing a weekly show on Fusion, a new network, and I work with millennials. The boss of the show, he's not even 30. I'm the oldest by far doing that show, and they chose me simply because people know who I am. But people are not waiting. Your generation is not waiting anymore. I waited to be a writer, and then a producer, and then a correspondent, and then go to 4 or 5 different wars, and then have a little interview. People are not waiting anymore. So in other words, you don't have to go to a small town anymore to start your career. If you have a great idea, you can start a blog on internet. You have a powerful voice. This is an example of what's going on in Mexico. In Mexico, there is not direct censorship between the government and the mass media, although most of the media in Mexico follows the lead of the government. And that's why there are journalists who are losing their jobs, like Carmen Aristegui right now in Mexico, and many others. So what's going on? Well, los mexicanos son muy tuiteros. In Mexico, they use a lot of Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. So there are young, I call them journalists, and they don't consider themselves journalists. But there are lots of journalists in Mexico using the internet, using YouTube channels that are having a huge impact in Mexican community and the Mexican psyche at this moment. Up to a point in which there is a growing movement in Mexico to try to get rid of President Peña Nieto. The Mexican law doesn't allow to have it's not a midterm election, but have a referendum right in the middle of his period to, so he could lose his power. However, there's the power of these people on the internet is so strong that Mexican society is changing. So that's what I would do. I mean, take advantage of the social media, take advantage of the internet, and that's where the new power is. If you concentrate on the old power, in 10, 15 years from now, we're going to be completely gone. Television as we know it is going to be gone in 20, 25 years.
Right here.
Thank you for being here. My name is Christian Martinez. I'm a Master in Public Policy candidate, and on behalf of my mom, I'm so excited to be here to see you today. She is Facebooking me like she's never Facebooked me before. My question, before coming to the Kennedy School, I was actually working at the Department of State. Most of my work is foreign policy, and I had the great opportunity to do a brief project with Secretary of State on engaging the diaspora globally, because the US has one of the largest set of diaspora from all over the world. Recently, they created a project specifically with Latin Americans, and the question remains, for so many diaspora communities, why are they so untapped? And what are your recommendations for tapping into diaspora communities for them to engage in development throughout Latin America? Because they're the ones who know the products that are selling in the US, that are hot within their countries of origin. So what are your recommendations for tapping into the diaspora community so they can be empowered, but also their countries of origin can also be economically more developed?
Every single American president I've talked to, they say that their priority is going to be Latin America, and that the relationship with Mexico is going to be the most important one. And it never happens. It never happens. But I think that as a community right here, for instance, the Mexican-American community or the Colombians or the Venezuelans here in the United States, they have a great opportunity to get in touch with their people in their own countries. And the first thing that I found fascinating is that we have mass media and ways of communicating what's really going on in those countries, like in Venezuela or in Mexico or in Cuba, where they truly face censorship. That's the first thing that I can think of, which is a direct, clear, non-censor channel of communication. And then we know what works when it comes to trade, when it comes to commerce. And finally, with politics, we have a stronger voice here. What happens is that many of us, when we come to this country, we try, obviously, first to survive. That's our story. We have to survive, and then we integrate so much to this country that we tend to forget where we come from. But to that point, I just want to mention that when I was talking to many of you, you were kind of frustrated with what's going on with immigration. And what I was saying is that what we're seeing for the first time is that maybe we thought 2 years ago that there was going to be immigration reform, and it might not happen. And I think what we're seeing right now is that there is a generation that is being sacrificed for the next generation. And maybe your parents are that generation. It's hard to realize and it's hard to recognize, but if this debate continues and nothing is resolved, your parents, your grandparents, those who watch me, might be the generation that is being sacrificed for you. And it is your responsibility now to do something for them.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Right here.
Hello,
Yeah.
my name is Ray Fong. I'm a Harvard graduate student. So I noticed, I noted that you said before that you believe that the Hispanic immigrant population were, as Reagan would say, are natural Republicans, that they're socially conservative. However, most polls indicate that most Hispanics are also highly economically progressive. Right? They support much higher social spending programs. They support higher progressive tax systems, policies that, for better or worse, are anathema to the current Republican Party. So it's and it has even been said that if a pathway towards citizenship is provided to most of these immigrants, while you may indeed generate some Republican voters, you're more likely to generate even more Democrat voters. So my question to you is, what exactly is the political incentive for the Republican Party to support immigration reform?
Although if they don't support immigration reform, say goodbye to the White House. That's the incentive. Because if they don't support immigration reform, not only immigration reform, because when they say immigration reform, it's a code word. They're really saying you have to reinforce the border, and then after that, then you have to apply E-Verify, and after that, maybe we'll give you the chance to work legally here. So I think the incentive for the Republican Party is, if you don't do that, and that's our little power. Remember, we're talking about power. This is our power. So if you don't give me that as a community, I won't vote for you. But I think you had something else to say, right?
Well, I was going to say that it seems to me that, so you've argued that the Republican Party is facing doom if they do not support immigration reform, but it seems to me that they're also facing doom if they support reform and thereby generate even more Democratic voters versus Republican voters.
No, I don't think so, because if they support immigration reform, they can go beyond 33% of the Hispanic vote. And if they go beyond 33%, they can win the White House. So there's no way for them. The U.S. population is becoming much more diverse. The white majority is going to disappear very soon, in just a few decades. So if they don't transform, they'll disappear from the White House, and eventually they might disappear as a party. So they either adapt to the new reality, and the new reality is that this is becoming a much more diverse country. Go ahead. No, you, if you had something.
Oh, I think that's a good answer. Thank you.
We'll go right here.
Yeah.
Hi.
I'll try to answer shortly.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Javier Juan Martinez, and I'm currently a freshman at Harvard. And my two-pronged question is, do you think that the DACA program is a step forward for immigration reform, or is it a guise in which to appease the Latin community? And do you think that it is a program that will last?
I hope that it'll last. But if Hillary wins, or the Democratic candidate wins, it'll last. If the Republicans win, I don't know. And that's where we get, again, our power. As a community, we push for DACA. That's deferred action. We're talking about young students who came here when they were very young by their parents. They came here illegally. And President Barack Obama didn't want to do that. And I think we forced him to do that. Remember, he promised immigration reform the first year. He didn't deliver it. And then we kept on pushing, and Dreamers kept on pushing until they convinced President Barack Obama that what he had said in the past, that he didn't have the authority, was wrong. So we got DACA, and I say we as a community, and we got the executive action that now is being fought in the courts. So that's our little power. And I don't know what's going to happen in the future with DACA or with the executive action if Republicans win the White House and we don't force the candidate, the Republican candidate, whoever he is, to promise that he won't go back on DACA and that he won't go back on Obama's executive action. I mean, that's how important it is. Eventually, that's the generation that is being sacrificed right now. Because there has been, since the year 2000, there has been a shift within the Hispanic community. In other words, the majority of the growth is not coming from immigrants, but it's coming from Latinos being born here in the United States. We love each other so much that we tend to have a lot of kids here. And well, among many other things. The border is more secure. There's more incentive for Latin Americans to stay in their countries of origin, and so on. But I think it's at risk, yes. DACA is at risk, yeah, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Hi, Jorge. Thanks so much for coming. My name is Max. I'm a sophomore. I want to ask you a political question. So we pretty much know of at least three major candidates, Marco Rubio, Jeb Bush, who's presumably going to run, and Hillary Clinton. And even though it's generally assumed that the Democratic Party is probably the party more likely to pass immigration reform, it seems like maybe there's an argument that Jeb Bush is actually more likely to pass immigration reform than Hillary Clinton. I'm honestly not sure. And so I'm curious, of those three candidates and also any of the other ones, if you'd like, who do you think would be the most likely to get immigration reform, a real immigration reform, passed if they're elected to the White House?
If it's immigration reform, it would have to be, at this point, whoever the Democratic candidate is going to be. Hillary Clinton, when she was running against Barack Obama, at some point she had more Hispanic support than Barack Obama. And when she was ahead, she promised that she was going to pass immigration reform within the first 100 days of her presidency. That didn't happen, of course. But she was right. She knew that there was only a moment, a period, for the new president to do something about it. I saw a poll last week, an ABC poll, in which it was Hillary Clinton against Jeb Bush, and Hillary Clinton would get 71% of the Hispanic vote against 26% of Jeb Bush. So that tells you something about that.
We can go right here.
Yeah.
I think they've waited.
Hi, my name is Patrick. I'm an immigrant too. Actually, my visa says I can't say that because I don't have dual intent. Anyway, I really appreciate your remarks on those topics. But I think ultimately this is sort of a global problem because where you were born shouldn't determine where you can work. And even getting a temporary work visa in the US is very difficult. So I was wondering what millennials can do to change the perception of what it means to be an immigrant, because I see millions of people leaving their home country temporarily to immerse themselves in different countries, and countries make it really hard to do that. So I was just wondering what what millennials can do sort of to change the perception.
I mean, what you're doing is beautiful because definitions are so difficult right now. And you live in a world and in a country so diverse that you are changing the way we perceive the world, and we're putting labels to the side. Paola, how do you define yourself? I mean, she's Cuban, Mexican, American with 3 passports, right? Yeah, from Spain, the US, and Mexico. How do you define yourself? I think that's a beautiful example of what you can do and what your generation can do to change the perceptions. You were talking about the difficulties of working in this country. It's something that nobody wants to discuss, and it is a taboo in this country. But if Europeans were able to work together in the European Union and have an immigration system in which you can be from Spain and work in England, and being born in France and work in Germany, why can't we do something similar here in between Canada, Mexico, and the United States? And no one wants to talk about that possibility. But those are some of the ideas that we can work with. And with this generation, your generation, that are so averse to labels, it would be just fantastic.
We're right up here.
Uh-huh.
Hi, Jorge. Thank you so much for being here. My name's Julio. I'm a sophomore at the college. As an undocumented Latino growing up, I watched Univision all the time. And I've noticed that Republicans are very hesitant to go on air, unlike Democrats, which have seemed to embrace it very readily. Why do you think Republicans are so scared to go on air, despite it potentially being the best way to get in touch with not just undocumented immigrants, but the Latino community in general?
Because I want to ask them, do you support immigration reform? Yeah, they don't want that. They know that there's nothing for them to gain. Although the savvy ones, and among them I would count Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and Jeff Bush, they talk to us continuously because despite the fact they don't have the same position, they know they have to confront those questions. But they have nothing to gain. Probably that's what they feel. Mm-hmm.
Right here.
Mr. Ramos, thank you for being here. My name is Roberto Rodriguez. I was born and raised in Cuba, and like you, came to this country as an immigrant. I'm an alum of the school. but I am a Democrat and I served in the Clinton administration.
Mm-hmm.
Here's my question. You started your talk talking about the power in numbers and the excitement of potentially having the first Hispanic president.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if you could pause and talk a little bit about the lessons we could take away from the first black president and how it empowered the African American community.
The lessons are wonderful and beautiful. Do you remember Barack Obama in 2008? He gave a marvelous speech in Chicago. And we all thought, and when I say we, not only the United States, the world thought that we were about to change. And then something else happened. It was very difficult. Remember, we were in the middle of economic crisis, and he had to concentrate on that, and then came Obamacare, and then nothing worked in Congress. But his lessons were fantastic. Before Obama, I used to go on book tours, and I would ask students and young people, Latinos mostly, if they wanted to be, who wanted to be president of the United States. And there were just a few hands being raised. After Barack Obama, I would go to the same places for book tours, and I would ask Hispanic kids, who wants to be president? And you see hands up all over the place. What Barack Obama did for us as a minority, and for other minorities in other parts of the world, it is incredible. It is maybe a story that it's only an American story, in which after decades of slavery, and then followed by decades of racism, followed by decades of discrimination, that we have an African American president. Once I had the opportunity to talk with President Obama on that, on the fact that many people thought that we were going to be living in a post-racial society. And he told me, you didn't believe that, right? And he was right. What he's telling us is that it's going to take many, many more decades for that to change. But I think the lesson that we're getting from Barack Obama is that this is an exceptional country. Did you have the chance to watch Marco Rubio yesterday? In his book, Marco Rubio, he says that he cried when he watched Barack Obama give his speech when he got elected president, because Obama inspired Rubio to be what he is right now, a presidential candidate. So I think that's the lesson that we're getting from Obama, that anything is possible, and that maybe that's one lesson. And another one, I'm thinking, Obama didn't run as an African American candidate. He ran as an American candidate. And if you notice, Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, they are not running as Hispanic candidates. They're running as American candidates. And I think that's a beautiful lesson that, and they're right, because if they run as a Hispanic candidate, they would absolutely lose. And I'm sure there are many other lessons, but Cuban Americans, they learn the political system very well in this country, and they've done tremendously well.
All right, right up here.
Yes, hello. My name is Mabo Emoisle, and I'm a student at the business school. My question is about what, in your view, is the future of Spanish language media in the U.S. As you said, the Latino population is increasing, but is primarily due to people being born here. And according to the Pew Research Center, an increasing percentage of Latinos are consuming media primarily or increasingly in English. So circa 2050, what do you think is the future of Spanish language media in the U.S.?
So in other words, if I'm going to have a job, I think the future for the Spanish language media is assured for decades, simply for a very simple reason. Despite of the fact that the majority of the growth within the Hispanic community is coming from people being born here, we still have 1 to 2 million immigrants legally and illegally coming in every single year. Most of them speak Spanish. So therefore, we have a market that is growing and growing. I'm sure you didn't watch it, but who do you think was the most watched television show last Sunday? We had the MTV Awards, right? Game of Thrones, Madame Secretary, And what? Okay, whatever. Yeah. Okay, so no, the most watched television show last Sunday for people 18 to 49 was a show called Nuestra Belleza Latina. 7 million people watch it. 7 million people. So I think I still have a job for a few more years. And I think we can assure you that in the next few decades, you'll see Spanish language media. That's another topic completely, but the Latino community is keeping so many elements from their country of origin, including Spanish. 9 out of 10 Latinos speak Spanish and speak Spanish at home. And we're doing things that Italians didn't do, or Russians, or Eastern Europeans didn't do. And the closeness to our countries of origin and the communications that we have are keeping Spanish language media alive. And thanks to that, it's a new power that other immigrant communities didn't have in the past.
We're right here. Jorge,
Yeah.
right here.
Hola, my name is Enrique Ramirez. I'm a sophomore at the college. I have a very simple question. Why do you think it is that a lot of the things that go on in Mexico are like largely ignored by the media? There was a surfacing with the kidnapping and murder of the students. There was a wave of coverage and concern, but it kind of went away, and it still hasn't been resolved. And there have been other things that like lots of things that I've heard happening through my family, through other outlets in Mexico, but not the major news sources. And why do you think that is?
The other day I was reading an interesting study on why. So the question is, why is the U.S. an isolationist country, right? Why we're so isolated sometimes?
Why does the U.S. ignore the violence and tragedies that happen in Mexico, but like pay attention to, for example, ISIS or when they?
I think you're giving us the answer because it's not relevant to their lives. Whatever is happening, they think it's not relevant to their lives. Whatever is happening in Mexico or in Ecuador, it doesn't have an immediate impact to their lives. But ISIS, the spectrum of terrorism, it is. I was reading a survey recently that said usually the economy is the most important issue for every voter in this country, but terrorism is becoming even more important than the economy. So I think the answer is that what's going on in Ecuador and in Mexico, in Venezuela, doesn't have an immediate impact to our lives here in the United States, while the opposite is not true. If you live in Ecuador or in Venezuela or in Mexico, whatever's happening in this country will have an immediate. If you live in Cuba, just imagine, if you live in Cuba, whatever happens in this country during the election will have an immediate impact in Cuba. If a Democratic candidate wins, then this new era of openness and diplomatic relations between the U.S. and Cuba will continue. But if Marco Rubio or Rand Paul or any Republican candidate wins, what do you think is going to happen in the relationship between the U.S. and Cuba? It'll change completely. The last time that I heard about Ecuador in the U.S. was was that the Super Bowl, when they spent millions of dollars on advertising. That was the last time. No? Okay.
First of all, thank you. Thank you. I'm Nestor Pimienta from the Harvard Divinity School. We just took a class trip to Tucson, Arizona, and Nogales, Mexico. And I wanted to ask you, in addition, since we've been talking a lot about immigration reform, but some of the stuff happening at the state level in different parts of the country that criminalize being not just undocumented, but being Latino, such as in Arizona, but in other places, the banning of Mexican American studies or other ethnic studies. And as we talk about Latino leadership in the future, what are the implications of that? And so I wanted to hear your thoughts on that, and also what can be done about that issue.
It is true, if you live in Pasco, Washington, and you're an immigrant, you could be killed for throwing rocks to the police. Or in Texas or in California, just recently we saw exactly the same thing going on, police killing immigrants. When you don't have a national policy on immigration, which is we don't have one, then what happens is that each state can do, and each city and each community can do whatever they want with immigration, and that's what's going on. You know Joe Arpaio, Sheriff Joe Arpaio, in Maricopa County in Arizona. He can do whatever he wants in that little piece of land that he has, simply because there's not a national policy on immigration that regulates everything. That's why we need to change the immigration law. Otherwise, each state would do whatever they want. If you are, if you're undocumented living in California, you can drive, but if you are in Arizona, you can't. You might have a driver's license, therefore you can travel. If you live in Arizona, you can do that. So it changes completely from one place to the other. That's why we need immigration reform.
Right behind you. Right here. You.
These two? Last?
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Mr. Bush. Thank you for being here. My name is Patricia Lozada. I'm a mid-career at the Kennedy School. And my question is, you are doing an excellent job, and thank you for that, but do you think that the Hispanic media is meeting their responsibility to inform the Latino community about the immigration issues in real depth? Because as I see it, as I told you before, maybe there's a lot of other information that we don't need, soap operas, gossiping. What about the real issues? Are they meeting their responsibility? And my second question would be, could you talk a little bit about the situation in Venezuela and why Latin America is doing almost nothing about it?
Let me start with Venezuela. It was shameful, and it was so sad to see 35 presidents and prime ministers in Panama last weekend, and not a single one had the courage to say the name Leopoldo Lopez or Antonio Ledesma. Those are political prisoners by the Maduro regime, and nothing is being said. It is incredible that we talk about democracy, and that at the same time, no one has the courage again to criticize what's going on in Venezuela. That is changing, although. Something happens when you become an ex, and I mean an ex-president. You thought I was going to talk about love, but no. So when you become an ex, suddenly you feel that you have more power, or something happens to you. 25 ex-presidents from Latin America and Spain decided to send a letter to the presidents in Panama to criticize what's going on in Venezuela. But unfortunately, unless in forums like this and in the media and other ex-presidents decide to talk about what's going on in Venezuela, there are going to be more political prisoners. On your second question, I think we're doing our job in the Spanish language media. Of course, there are many. I don't watch the novelas. I'm sure you don't either. But on the other hand, it is expected from us much more than what you expect from anchors and journalists from ABC News, CBS, CNN, Fox News. In other words, it's not only that we're supposed to inform what's going on, but also to guide the community when it comes to education, to immigration, to politics. So in that sense, I think you have a very well-informed community in terms of what the big problem is. And we know exactly what the problem is right now. Republicans are blocking immigration reform in Congress, and Obama is doing as much as he can with the executive action. But of course, we can do more. But I think the important issues, I think, are being covered. Okay.
Last question.
Last one.
Jorge, my questions are very simple. First, who do you think in the Democratic Party is a rising Latino political figure? Second, do you see Julian Castro running as vice president, hopefully with Hillary, on Hillary's ticket?
Yeah, I'm not sure if Hillary will need a Hispanic candidate, because she's getting the Hispanic vote easily. So I don't think she's going to need a Hispanic vice presidential candidate to win that. Yeah, among the rising stars, if you want, from the Democratic Party, I see Governor Susana Martinez, of course, but on the Democratic Party, Julian and Joaquin Castro are the ones we mention a lot. Antonio Villarraigosa used to be a huge possibility, and that's about it right now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. here for a few more minutes if you want to talk or take selfies or so on.